And welcome back, listeners. Now we're going to go and look at the issue of the budget. It's a huge, vast budget. So many government departments, funding announced yesterday, various measures announced, and then further details will come from each minister over the coming days. We're joined on the phone now by Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill, who is a Minister for State at the Department of Finance. Good morning, Minister, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're very welcome. Now, I think you mentioned, I spoke in the Shannon last night, this is the first budget you've been involved in. Was there anything in particular you sought that has been given or was refused in the budget?
Well, Minister McGrath announced yesterday that we're reducing a levy on the insurance companies. So we're reducing it from 2% to 1% because of the government's reform programme, which has brought motor insurance prices down. But we're expecting that 1% decrease now to be passed on further to consumers. So there's 2.2 million policyholders, motor insurance policyholders in Ireland. They will have all seen their premiums come down by about 40% since 2016 or so. And I'm hoping that additional 1%, and I know it's only 1%, but it's still an additional reduction. And that was important to me that was announced yesterday and included in the budget. So I welcome that from my perspective, focusing on insurance, but much more broadly about the supports for people who are struggling perhaps with the cost of living challenges, making sure that the economy is still going the way it is, making sure that we have extra supports for innovative businesses right around Ireland and in different regions who are establishing and looking for investment and looking to drive employment in their regions. So there's quite a lot for keeping the economy strong and employment very strong, and obviously we've never been stronger in terms of our employment figures at the moment, but making sure that we're trying to meet people's needs in as targeted a way as possible as they go through a winter with inflation and still not as high as last year energy prices, but still very challenging.
Yes, a lot of people are, I think, very much appreciative of the various once-off payments, but other organisations are saying those once-off payments quickly disappear and that there needed to be a more focused targeting of spending in the budget. Just to come back to the motor insurance levy, that levy was introduced, it's the Motor Insurers Bureau levy. It creates a fund where if a driver is involved in a collision with another driver that doesn't have insurance, that fund is the party that will pay the compensation. You're going to reduce that by 1%. Is that definite? It will be passed on to the consumer?
No, but I expect it to be, which is why I'm saying it so loud and proud and clearly to insurance companies that I do expect that to be able to be passed on. And, that fund, just so that people aren't worried about it in any way, that fund is well capitalised and we're comfortable that we're in a position where we can do this, otherwise we wouldn't do it. Because, of course, uninsured driving is a very significant problem in Ireland. We have far too many uninsured drivers. We've changed the Road Traffic Acts to make it easier for Gardaí to be able to identify licence plates automatically where their car isn't insured, and to be able to go after them much more effectively, because it's just a huge problem and it puts 30 to 35 euros on everyone's policy. So it's a real social ill. It's an appalling thing to do to your neighbours to drive without insurance. But we're also comfortable that the fund is at a point where we can make a change of this kind, and we are trying to constantly reduce costs for people taking out motor insurance or other forms of insurance.
But is it possible that the insurance company would levy the driver a 2% levy and pass on the 1% to the government and keep the other 1%?
Well, they've already been paid. This has already been paid for some years, to be honest with you. So this is a reduction, and it's a very clear signal that we expect that. That's why it was in the budget speech yesterday. I mean, there isn't a stronger signal that you can send that it must be passed on to policyholders. But they will have already seen, because of the government's reform programme, a reduction of 40% or over 40% in many cases in their motor insurance premiums since 2016. And as Minister for Insurance, I am working every day to make sure that the benefit of the reform programme sticks, so that people can get, if they have a claim that needs to be made, that they can get compensation much more quickly, but a much more cost-effective way for everyone through the PIAB process, the personal injury.
There has been, yes, huge reform.
About 1/20th, of going to court, and those costs get passed on to everybody else. So doing it in the statutory way through PIAB works much better for the whole of society.
But just in Ireland, the consumer tends to have to be completely on their guard as regards ensuring that they're not being ripped off in Ireland. So for drivers, the message is when you get your premium, the levy should be at 1%. That's what you should be paying on your insurance premium as of the 1st of January, I understand?
Yeah, that's right. But that's, I think people will have already seen significant reductions. And where I really want to see now the next stream of reductions is in relation to businesses, pubs, adventure tourism. All of these will benefit from a change made in July this year, which changes the balance of liability away from the business taking on all responsibility if someone has a slip, trip or fall, to people assuming much more voluntary assumption of risk. It's a much more balanced way of doing things. It's similar to what we have in the UK and Canada, across Europe, and from July onwards. So it won't impact last year's premium, but over the next 12, 18, 24 months, there is a different legal landscape, and I'm trying to say it as loud as I can so that businesses all over Ireland can hear this when they're having next year's negotiation with their broker, with their insurance company, that they are armed with the knowledge that the government has made this very significant change, and that we expect that to be priced into business insurance, public liability insurance over the next 2 years. I was in London last week talking about these changes. The underwriters there are actually a very significant part of our insurance pricing here. They're all well aware that this change has been made. The Bloomberg, analysts would all be very complimentary about the changes that have been made in Ireland, but it really is now up to the insurance companies domestically and those new ones that are constantly coming into the market. And already I can see them undercutting prices here. That we see the change for everyone. I was speaking to an adventure tourism group based in Dunleary at our chamber dinner last week, who were telling me that the excess on their premium for the last 2 years, say, has been €100,000. This year the excess is €25,000 with a new entrant to the market, and those new entrants are coming because of the changes that the government has made. But it's only...
Well, also they're coming because it's a lucrative market in which they can make huge profits. That has to be their ultimate reason for coming into the Irish market.
I think they're expanding their presence in Ireland, and they're coming in. Like, what they want is a stable, predictable market. Yes, insurance companies will make a profit, but not astronomical profits. Where the risk is, where the instability is, if you get unexpected huge awards, or you can't predict how the courts are going to react to slips, trips and falls, and how all of that is managed. But if you have a stable environment, people can price all of that in a predictable way. They can still make a profit.
Okay, Minister, sorry, just to go back to the budget, and I appreciate, and I just want to clarify that point, that financial services, credit unions and insurance was your area of responsibility, and that's why I zoned in on the motor insurance levy change, because that's one of the key areas for your area, as you say, insurance as well. You also spoke on the Shannon yesterday and said the most significant thing in the budget was the Future Ireland Fund.
Yes, I think it is, because in addition to providing supports for this year for people, we need to plan long term, and we do have this one-off moment where we have these very significant corporation taxes, and we've tried to create a fund, 2 funds actually, but the Future Ireland one is the really big one, where we're putting that money away, not just €4 billion this year, but 0.8% of GDP every year for the next number of years. And if we do that, and if we invest it carefully, and if we invest it without touching it, if we have the discipline not to touch it, we can develop a fund of €100 billion by 2035. And governments from then on will be able to take a little bit off the top of the interest of what it earns every year and use that to be able to support spending in Ireland at that stage. But that is such a meaningful difference in our overall public finances, to be a bit more like Norway, who have this very significant sovereign wealth fund, who never need to borrow, who aren't subject to the same, ups and downs on the market or interest rates and bonds as we are. And we need to create, while we have this once-off opportunity, this opportunity to create a fund. And the people that's going to really benefit are young people today in their 20s, when they're in their 40s, and they're watching Budget Day in October in 2042 or whenever. They will be the beneficiaries of that decision. And so
what you hope to do is set aside some funds every year to create that fund?
That's right. So we're putting in €4 billion this year from the national, from what people call our rainy day fund, and then we'll put in 0.8% of GDP every year thereafter to build up a fund with compound interest and investment to what we expect to be about €100 billion.
So that's something that's in the future that might be beneficial to people. But coming back to now, schools are disappointed with the level of funding for schools, concerns about air quality in school buildings, concerns about funding for information technology. The Minister brought in a scheme to introduce free books to secondary school students, first, second and third year for a start. But other parents who've invested in iPads, are they going to be at a loss now? Are they included in this?
I heard the Minister for Education speaking about this morning, and she said, look, everybody has school books, but only some people have iPads, and I have to start somewhere. So last year she started with primary school. This year she's extended that to the junior cycle, and I know that the intention is to try to keep going. But, we have a certain amount of resources. We can't do everything in just 1 year. But it's a really good question, and it's a legitimate question. And I suppose government every year is trying to spend so much without adding to inflation too much, and that's a pretty careful balance every year. This year you'll have seen the Fiscal Advisory Council caution us on spending, and that's appropriate, and that that is a good. We have to be very careful.
But although the Minister did introduce that. she did introduce the book scheme for primary schools. There was a similar reduction in funding for ICT for schools, and that's what people are concerned. The government are kind of moving money around. You're putting $4 billion into a future climate fund. Was there also $4 billion set aside to provide housing for Ukrainian refugees?
Yes, there was very significant funding put aside for precisely that, and there's also €5 billion between capital and other funding for housing in general. So there's very significant funds involved between once-off supports, between longer-term structural cost reduction, 25% reduction in childcare costs on the back of last year's 25% reduction. And those are the sorts of things that make a big difference to families whose bills will be going down as a consequence of that, and whose income will be going up as a consequence of tax changes and the once-off payments. And we do have to be careful not to build too much of that into our permanent spending, because that would be unsustainable.
But Minister, just go back to the allocation of €4 billion for housing for Ukrainians. People are looking at the map and they're saying there's loads of space and hotels in Ukraine. Why isn't Ukraine accommodating its own refugees within its own country? Move from the east to the western part of the country. Why does Ireland have to spend $4 billion on this?
I've heard that on Facebook and other places, and it's not an argument that I want to go down. We are part of the EU and part of the United Nations.
But Ukraine is not part of the EU.
We are part of the UN. There is a refugee crisis on the continent of Europe. We have a very, very significant conflict, a war in that region, and there are people spilling out of Ukraine to Poland, Germany, right across Europe. And as in Ireland, we have to play our part in that as well. There's also been a huge vibrancy brought, I think, in particular into my community, yes, but in particular in the west of Ireland, where Ukrainian families are in schools, in homes, and are adding to the community. And many people who are coming here come here with great skill, and come here with a desire to work and to be part of a community, and to do that in a really constructive way. And perhaps in the long term we'll be the beneficiaries of that population growth, and we'll be the beneficiaries of that skill and that different impetus into our community.
Well, we have thousands and thousands of people homeless in Ireland. We have thousands and thousands of people on housing lists in Ireland. Can Ireland afford to choose to spend $4 billion to house Ukrainians?
Our social housing list has come down by a third in the last number of years. We're in the fortunate position of being one of the few, if not the only, country in Europe that has a budget surplus this year. I was in London last week and I was asked, how do you feel about being the only country in Europe with a budget surplus and everywhere else is going into recession? And, we downplay those things because we are so...
Minister, don't downplay the housing crisis. Do you accept we have a housing crisis in Ireland?
I am not in any way downplaying the housing crisis, but what I am saying...
You're saying, look at the budget surplus, which is not an answer to the housing crisis.
We are a country, but it's also a fact, and we have €5 billion to address the housing crisis this year. We are creating 30,000 homes a year. Our social housing list is going down. We are creating more affordable accommodation. We are trying to provide supports to first-time buyers, 400 of which are getting a new home every week, which is astonishing and needs to keep going, but it is addressing the housing crisis as best we can. But we also have a pressure arising from a ground war in Europe where we have a refugee crisis, and I would hope that if we had a ground war in Ireland and Irish people wanted to leave and go to work to be supported in other parts of Europe or around the world, that other parts would help and support us.
Minister, in the history of Ireland, the Irish people have gone to many countries all around the world, and when they got to those places, nobody said, here's a house, here's a medical card, here's funding for a car.
But what does that mean? Should we not provide support to Ukrainian refugees?
Well, you're saying we have limited resources. People are concerned about not having housing, teachers in their schools, not having nurses in their healthcare service, and the government seem to have a priority here of trying to appease Europe and be the good boys in Europe rather than looking after Irish citizens.
I reject that completely. The Irish government has been supporting Irish people. The social housing list has come down by a third. We provide significant support through HAP and through a whole range of different support schemes, particularly for lone parents. The people who benefit the most from yesterday's budget are single people, single lone parents, and single people, older people living on their own in particular as well, in the sense that they get these more supports than anybody else in Ireland. They are the people who have been prioritised, and all of the budgetary documentation shows that we are trying to provide the best support that we can to those who need it most, and that is totally appropriate. That doesn't require any thanks or gratitude, and that is exactly what we should be doing.
Organisations that look after people with disabilities are very dissatisfied with the budget. The Simon communities are very dissatisfied with the budget. Surely they're the people who need it most?
But everybody, you can pick out any sector as you have. You've picked out teachers, you've picked out nurses, you've picked out Simon. Everyone would like more, and I understand that. But at the same time, you might very well say to me that the Fiscal Advisory Council says you can't spend too much, or you'll ramp up inflation. And what I'm saying is that somebody has to sit in the middle of that and make the decisions that try to keep a lid on inflation and try to provide supports in the best way. And I suggest that if you or anybody else were sitting at the centre of those demands and trying to get the balance right there, you would face similar challenges in doing so. It isn't straightforward. It is about trying to make sure that we protect the economy and the public finances for everybody for the long run, and also try to provide the most targeted supports that we can. And that is a difficult reality. But on the other hand, we have to recognise one of the few economies in Europe that does have a budget surplus, and that is a pretty unique experience right now, and we shouldn't forget that and do ourselves down at every moment. We have produced a budget yesterday that provides enormous support to people, as we did last year, only because we can, only because of the work of the Irish people in developing our economy in the way that we have. But we must have a strong economy in order to provide supports to people, which is the Fine Gael approach, which is my approach, and is what we want to continue to do for the future.
Very good. Minister, just a final point. We did see an increase in the training allowance for Gardaí, which I think people will welcome. Their allowance is now going to be increased to €305 per week for the Gardaí that attend the training college here in Templemore. The government budget also allowed there might be recruit between 800 and 1,000 additional Gardaí next year. The Garda budget overall will be Justice budget will be €2.3 billion for An Garda Síochána. I think the people will really welcome that, because people have a lot of concerns about the future of policing in Ireland.
I think that is really appropriate, and it was a huge concern to me that the training contract, that the weekly price was less than, for example, job seekers, and now it has been changed, and it's really important that was done, and I think it's a recognition of the recruitment challenge that we've had. We do have funding for over 1,000 new Gardaí coming in addition to 250 civilian staff, which is so important. It's an important statement by the government about trying to support An Garda Síochána and trying to...
Yes, again, but as we all know, previous recruitment targets have not been met. Minister, finally, did Fine Gael look to the election when they decided where to spend the money in the budget?
I think if they were doing that, they wouldn't have created a Future Ireland Fund, and they would have given every bit of money to everyone who asked for it. That isn't the Fine Gael approach. It is about trying to restore the economy back to full employment, make sure that we have a prudent public finances for the future, and that we are planning in a way that gives us the best long-term sustainability and security for our people, and to make sure that we can provide supports to those people who need it at the right time. I think what we're looking to the future is making sure, Heather Humphreys is looking at making sure that people who lose their job get support at a level closer to their salary, to try to help with any transition, rather than the cliff edge of going to job seekers too quickly. Those are important longer term structural changes. She's brought in a pension for carers. We've had a real focus on carers in the last 3 budgets, in extending the eligibility, making sure that people who are working and have children and are not eligible for other supports are getting more support now through tax relief, but also extension of working family payments, and making sure that we have the right supports for people over the medium and long term. That's certainly our focus. If it was election, I think we'd be doing something very different. That's really not our priority. Our priority is...
Well, that's good to hear, Minister McNeill. I have my next guest in studio, but could I just divert, and apologies, listeners, if you think it's inappropriate to divert. Are you going to Paris on Saturday night?
No.
I'm not, no. I would love to be, but no, I'm not.
Okay, but you'll be hoping for a win?
I'll be watching it on the telly with my little boy.
Very good. Minister McNeill, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And that's Minister Carol McNeill, Jennifer Carol McNeill, who is the Minister at the Department of Finance with responsibility for credit unions, insurance, and for the financial services sector, and really they're hopefully to give you an overview of, from her perspective, of the budget. One of the key things as a responsibility for insurance was that the Motor Insurance Bureau's levy, that is going to be reduced to 1% in the next round of premiums that will come into effect on the 1st of January.
Keeping you close to the heart of your